Looking at the README, I've left some of the basic instructions for setting up both the local infrastructure and then running the actual app. We're going to start with the infrastructure, which requires you to have both Docker and Docker Compose installed, because we're going to be using those Docker containers to run the Cassandra, Kafka, and the related Zookeeper instances for infrastructure. Looking at our Docker Compose file, we can see that first I have declared the Cassandra service using Cassandra 4.0. It typically runs on port 9042, so you have to map it. Otherwise, I've added in some additional settings to make it more easy to maintain. Specifically, we're going to be storing the actual Cassandra data on our local file system, so you have the ability to not only look at it and access it with other tools, so that the database data doesn't disappear in between restarts. Zookeeper is only required for being able to run Kafka. Originally, it was for managing Kafka offsets. Now it has some different purposes. Entirely isn't important what it's doing in this case. But for the Kafka example, we're using the Confluent version of Kafka. And additionally, we have to add some settings to tell it that it's able to talk to external brokers who can publish to it. And I'm setting all the replication factors to 1 because we're not going to be running a cluster. But just as with the Cassandra data, we are storing the Kafka data locally, which can also be used because the Kafka data is actually stored as raw text on the file system. So it could be useful for sometimes debugging stuff with what partition data went into. For this next part, we're going to use the Docker Compose command, specifically Docker Compose up-d for detach mode, to launch the brand new Docker containers. If this is the first time you're doing it, you're going to see a lot of downloads be happening here. You can see the actual project using Docker Desktop by clicking on it. You can see the individual containers, Kafka, Cassandra, and Zookeeper all running up. Clicking on each one lets you see their logs. Cassandra is the one that usually takes the longest to start up. You'll know that it's done starting up once you get a burst of sudden output, probably 2 minutes in. The reason we need to know this is because we're going to run a command, specifically a Docker Compose execution, which is going to run this CQL command to create the key space we need inside of the database, or for the database. So we've created a key space, we created our entity table, we're creating a key space, setting the replication factor to 1, and creating an entity called myEntity with just an ID and a value. We then need to go ahead and create our Kafka topics. I'm using the Kafka topics command, which is, if you're inside the Kafka container, it also exists as a command you can run, or you can download the Kafka command line tools. We're going to be creating a topic called myTopic. We can see that it got created, and to further inspect it, if we look in the Docker data directory, we see the Cassandra data. Here's our key space and our Kafka data, where we created a topic with 10 partitions, so you see a directory for each partition.